proper synergy, there will be proper coordination. That is one. Two, for a very long time I've been listening to our tax to GDP ratio about 6%. It is high time we do a scientific analysis where it is now. We cannot for about 6 years it's like a broken record. Is it 6.5? Is it 7? Is it 8? Now, besides, I have identified from my own studies that the government has allowed the non-state actors a lot of latitude to take the money that the government should take. And if you Google now, you see what NURTW, National Union of Road Transport Workers, got nearly 200 billion within a very short while, and it's a non-state actor. If all that had gone to government, some of the deficits we are talking about, we wouldn't be talking about it. Because I'm giving 2 minutes, I have more points, but I don't want to disobey the moderator.
Thank you very much. I think
yes.
So what stands out for Dr. Eze is one, the lack of intergovernmental coordination and synergy, both vertical and horizontal, among the various players in fiscal governance. And the second point are the leakages, which is taken advantage of by the non-state actors, the example of which you gave. Professor Oversight.
Thank you, moderator. Well, I listened to the presentation, and I think one conclusion.
Please, if we can have one house, it will be nice. Please.
I think one conclusion that comes out very clearly is that the more things appear to change, the more they remain the same. And I'm saying this because among the 3 tiers of government in Nigeria today, it's only at the level of the federal government that you see a modicum of governance and some commitment to reform, and yet the kind of leakages that occur still occur. You know, and I say this because more often than not, governors cry to Abuja, they explain the problem in the country in terms of Buhari's leadership. And yet I can tell you that only 4 states are working in this country. But where you have even seen evidence of reform, you don't see any change. And I think it's very frustrating, you know, because of the very nature of Nigeria's political economy. But I think the one that really bothers me is about fiscal federalism in terms of the access of subnational government to taxing sources and the way it appears centralized in favor of the national government at the expense of the subnational governments. Yes, we have seen very depressing figures about ratio of tax to GDP. And I think what this really speaks to is that in Nigeria, taxation does not yet matter in terms of driving governance and democracy. And I think it's that weak link that we need to address. And it is in that context that I would think that what this country needs urgently is to review the existing tax arrangements, you know, which favor the national government. And let us identify innovative ways at local level, and let those who pay tax at local level know what they are paying tax for, so they now know the cost of what they are paying as basis for demanding accountability from leaders. And my last point on this, the context of our federal experience is quite discouraging. Because we are not just dealing with questions of constitutional division of powers among levels of government. I think what we are not doing very well in this country is to cultivate what we call the federal culture. Federalism is not about that formal division of powers between the 3 levels of government. What scholars of federalism call attention to is the need to cultivate the federal culture of dialogue, discussion, and consensus building But because of the context of politicizing ethnicity, adversarial politics, we find an informal institution like the Governors Forum that should be the base of that type of dialogue, engaging in the kind of politics that, does not take this country anywhere. My point really is that we need to go beyond the letters of the Constitution, look at the spirit of federalism, unity and diversity, the need to maintain, equity or minimum national standard to some level, the need to assign governments, the national government, the kind of fiscal powers to enable it to intervene, but at the same time, enable subnational governments fulfill their mandate to their citizens. So this is what I think we can really have a productive dialogue around.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, we have Chartered Institute of Taxation with us. I'm sure we'll come back to you later to get us into how do we transform the tax architecture in Nigeria innovatively to ensure tax justice and more collective ownership of the tax ecosystem. So, sir, please.
All right, so thank you very much. And I think some of the things that emerged for me in that presentation essentially is the apparent weakness in the enforcement of the laws governing our fiscal governance. So if you have laws around revenue mobilization and fiscal commission, fiscal responsibility commission, and a whole lot of other laws, and there is still this level of weaknesses in our fiscal governance space, I think that's something that needs to be dealt with sufficiently. Number two for me is also the apparent weakness in subnational IGR, and that's a factor of production. If those subnational governments do not see themselves as an economy and factor in economic growth and productivity, are not looking up to the federal government consistently, the challenge will remain in terms of that weakness. Another major thing that actually emerged for me is the issue around the underperforming or non-functional government enterprises that are hemorrhaging government resources. That's a major issue that is not being dealt with. So most of those enterprises are basically hemorrhaging revenues and nothing is being done about it. So for us to survive the fiscal crunch, there is the need to seriously look at those underperforming or non-functional government enterprises that have consistently hemorrhaged revenues for Nigeria. So those are the major things that are emerging for me. I know we can progress with the conversation later.
Thank you very much, Uwe. So we touched on three key issues that we need to take note of. First is the weakness in enforcing the laws around fiscal governance, and then the weak IGR, should I say, capacity or willingness at subnational level. And the third issue is the non-performing government enterprises that are more or less like parasites on the system, and what to do with them. Please.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Akin gave a very splendid account of what is happening at the national level regarding the fiscal, policy structures that are in place, the practical experiences, which they've had with the limited revenue generating federal MDAs, and also the level of ICT, right? Reliance, which has also, helped them. For me, because of what I do in my day-to-day, I'd rather us also take into account what you have happening at the subnational level. And the state government and the local governments as well. Because if we are to develop, to have a holistic, tax-efficient fiscal policy in place in Nigeria, the emphasis should not be at what is happening at the national level. Now, I like the topic because I had to think about it again. When of this whole seminar, right? And then a key thing it says is the economic resilience. And what that is saying is that what are you doing? How are you making money? How are you spending money? And then when you have shocks, will you be able to bounce back and to transform yourself? Now, it's like a case of a man who has been fasting for 1 year, right? If you have any disease hit him, you most likely cross the equator. And that is what is happening at the sub-national level as well. Every time that we run into trouble in the state, we only we run to the center. It's because we don't have enough. We don't have a myriad of issues which are challenges to us at the state level. Right? And those things, I believe that, I do hope that we'll still have the time to actually explore, like uncoordinated data, limited use of technology, right? Also the quality of the revenue collection staff as well. We do have a lot of cases of us putting hungry men in the kitchen. So the professor he alluded to the issue of corruption. So all those things we need to really delve into. So we have a coordinated approach to resolving this big issue for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. For the purpose of rapporteurs, that was Mr. Adegbenga Adesina, Special Advisor to the Government of Ogun State on Revenue Mobilization. Can we now have Dr. Mohammed Lawal, Executive Director of Revenue Operations, Kaduna State?
Yes, thank you. I think it was a packed presentation, but honestly, nothing particularly, or should I say exceptionally new in it, besides maybe a few things. A lot of what went into the presentation, I think we know, and for some of those problems, we've already put in solutions in place. For instance, if you talk about procyclicality and the problems that it comes with, part of the solutions in the past was to put the Sovereign Wealth Fund in place. But how well is the Sovereign Wealth Fund doing to create the capital base, right, for the country to absorb these shocks? So, like I said, a lot of it we know, but what the presentation did for me, to be honest, is to help me reestablish and convince myself about some of the things that I believe prior to this point, about how to fix some of these fiscal problems that we have. I believe that we can't have very complex solutions to it. What will solve these problems are quite simple. Going back to the basics, very basic things. In fact, taking care of education, taking care of health, taking care of basic infrastructure and things like that, right? And it's not going to be a quick fix again. And it's not going to be, something that we expect to do in a very short run. I also believe that what we need to focus on, based on what came out from the presentation, is high quality investments in ourselves as a country. We are taking on a lot of debt today. We are piling that on the future generation of this country. Now, are the investments that we are making with this debt good enough to generate the level of income that will pay off this debt in the future? So we have to look at the quality of investments that we are making with the debt that we are taking. Now, again, it also highlights something that is very conspicuous, because I'm also in revenue administration now, and it has become more glaring to me that we haven't made the right type of investments in our revenue administration infrastructure for it to generate the type of revenue that will sustain us into the future. That needs to be done. We haven't done that. It's going to be really expensive to build state-of-the-art technology for revenue assurance, and even to train the staff to provide the kind of things we require for logistics and so on and so forth. So, yes, I think these are some of the things that really stood out for me.
So since you've been reflecting on this issue, we'll come back to you, because this question of revenue administration infrastructure, what kind of architecture are you looking at? I mean, we'll come back to you on that. I just want to pose the question for you to reflect on it.
Okay.
Are you suggesting an architecture that functions at the federal level separately and at subnational level separately, or an integrated architecture that pulls the resources into a bowl and then goes to different units? So we'll come back to you. You don't have to respond now.
Yeah,
we have to go. Don't worry.
Before we come back to it, let me just add, we have the most complex architecture in the world.
You said that, but you said the solution would be a simple architecture.
Yeah.
So if you could reflect on it so that when we come back to you, let us into what you have in mind. Okay. Let's come to Dr. Pasua for his thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm the last man standing. I have quite a bit to say, but I'll make it very quick. When I was invited to this event, I quickly did a bit of research around fiscal governance, and I realized that what is defined as how budgetary policy is planned, approved, implemented, monitored, and evaluated. I think it's important to also go back to the basics because, of course, Dr. Adeyemi's paper went straight to the empirical issues we have in Nigeria. And of course, the planks of fiscal governance is national numerical fiscal rules in terms of, you're talking about how much debt do you want vis-a-vis your GDP, how much deficit vis-a-vis GDP and stuff like that. Also, you want to have independent fiscal institutions who benchmark the government. Also, you want to have, and that is from there that the medium-term budgetary frameworks also come out. And this is EU standard. So I think in spite of our problems, we also need to understand that we need to begin to ramp up to what is global standards in terms of fiscal governance. I am more concerned also in terms of our budget size. I'll speak about that later, hopefully. And also the political capture. And also that the fact that the crude oil still dominates the budget, that the key, especially the national budget, the key assumption is crude oil and how much you want to sell and what is the benchmark. And we have not been able to get out of that. This one is gone. Okay, thank you, sir. So hopefully to say that whereas we have a crude oil sector, but a petroleum sector, or what are we expecting from solid minerals, for example? What are we expecting from other sectors that matter to the economy? There's been some attempt in the last budget, but it hasn't quite kicked in. So what I heard from Dr. Adeyemi's paper was a cry for help. And perhaps for the first time in a while, I heard, someone who's sitting in government actually dovetailing on the critical issues they have. For example, the issue of the 60 GOEs, who have always made money and spent what they made. And in the last budget, the Minister of Finance said, look, we're going to bring in these 60 GOEs. I can see already that there's still a resistance to that. And these are very powerful government-owned enterprises who are countries on their own. So I heard a cry for help, and also I saw a reflection on the impunity. I will end by saying that about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was in Accra, Ghana. And of course, if you went into a hotel in Accra, Ghana and had a lunch, you would see these taxes that I will mention. 17.5% VAT, 2.5% national health insurance, 2.5% Ghana Education Tax Fund, 1% COVID levy, and 1% tourism fee in Ghana. And Nigerians go there, they pay. Then we come to our country and say, wow, why are we doing this? So we've seen a scenario where the informal sector is growing and growing in leaps and bounds. But what happens if people would rather pay to the Road Transport Union, for example, than pay to government, than pay to the state government, or than pay to the federal government. But what that does to all of us is that it inches us closer to that state of nature described by Thomas Hobbes, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. because people don't think they have any obligation to government, whether at the state, local, or federal government level. And I think that that is what reflects in what Dr. Adeyemi presented. Unfortunately, I think he had to leave, but that reflects in the paper to say that even they sitting in Accountant General office are having to chase and fight all these fires all over the place. I think I'll end it there, sir, and hopefully get to speak later. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that powerful contribution. So all we're going to do is we'll come back to the panel, but we don't want to leave the audience out of this conversation. We are going to create space for three. But the cameramen are not allowing me to see, because if we have women raising hands from here, can I see this hand that? Okay, so we'll take the women first, then the remaining two will do random sampling. So please, madam.
Thank you. Good morning once again. I want to take on Dr. Fashua from what he just said, and I listened to the guest speaker. Nigerians. Okay, sorry, I'm Joy Jaisimi. I'm a journalist. Nigerians being hesitant, especially when it comes to tax payments. Are Nigerians actually seeing the impacts of the tax they are paying? You know, when we pay tax, or Nigerians do not like paying tax, and they go to other countries and they'll be willing to pay tax. The citizens of those countries tax because they could readily see the services, the education, the healthcare, and all. They could readily see it. But the healthcare and all our tax, and those who are not ready to pay the tax, like, if I pay this tax, what is being used for? Especially to be looted. And even the police and some other people whose our tax monies are used to pay them, they brutalize us. So are Nigerians really ready to pay tax? Is the federal government also providing the services to encourage Nigerians to pay tax? I think this should be another discussion, why Nigerians are not paying tax, and what should the federal government do to ensure Nigerians? Are Nigerians really ready to pay tax? Is the federal government also providing the services to encourage Nigerians to pay tax? I think this should be another discussion, why Nigerians are not paying tax, and what should the federal government do to ensure Nigerians pay tax?
Well, that looks like chicken and egg situation for me. Which one comes first? Do you provide service to encourage people to pay taxes, or you get taxes to provide services so that people can pay taxes? You do both simultaneously. Okay. You respond to that. Okay. So we'll take one to the right, then one to the left. Let's take yes, you take you, sir. The red cap, sir. Then use the last slot for the left.
My name is Hasimiyu Abiola. I work for the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, National Assembly. It's unfortunate that the presenter has left us, but I want to put the record straight. I think he has not told her this whole story about revenue, spending, and so on. The end product of all the spending and generation, the National Assembly has been left out of the whole process. That is the legislature. This body has the power to do oversight of the revenue as well as the expenditure. In the National Assembly and all the states, there's a particular committee, the Public Account Committee, which is to audit
and then advise the government, the legislature, on what he said all revenue should be paid into the CRF and so on. But the Auditor General has a lot of challenges. If the Auditor General can be strengthened, or some of these challenges might not be there. What are these challenges? Section 85 of the Constitution says that the President shall appoint an Auditor General based on the recommendation of the Federal Civil Service Commission. That's a compromise. The person being appointed sees himself or herself as a civil servant. That's compromise number one. Is to audit the money spent by the executive, the government. Two, this Auditor General relies on the report of the Accountant General. Unfortunately, he has left. He's from that particular office. The law says the Auditor General shall submit his report to the National Assembly upon receiving the same from the Accountant General. But the law did not say when the Accountant General should give him that report. So if he's not given, he cannot work. Compromise number three, he could not also do the audit on his own because it's only to audit the ministries. The agencies that he was talking about are being audited indirectly, and how? The Auditor General is to prepare a list of suitably qualified auditors, then prepare their fees, and then ask the agencies to select any meticulous auditor will not get his contract reviewed the following year. So the report he is collecting, sending to the National Assembly, is compromised already. Number five, the Auditor General is seen as an enemy. He is the only FDN office that has no building in Abuja. They are still renting their office. You can quote me. He doesn't have the power to hire his own staff. As I speak.
That is the Auditor General.
Yes, sir. He doesn't have the power. Staff are sent to him from the other MDAs. And who will then empower his enemy? That is number one. Finally, in other climes, the US, Canada, South Africa, the Auditor General is an officer of the Parliament. He works for the Parliament. In Nigeria, the Auditor General works with the Parliament, and these are not the same. Working for and working with, they are not the same. We need to make some changes to make the Auditor General work for the Parliament such that he will be empowered, having the backing of the National Assembly or the State House of Assembly, to be able to do the needful. So that even if there are challenges in the revenue generation, expenditure and so on, there will be somebody who will say, look, this is the way to do it. And finally, the moderator, what we are saying about revenue inadequacy is just arithmetic. It is because of unrealistic estimates. You say you want to get a certain amount of revenue. It may not come. It may not come. And the reason why we are over-ambitious expenditure and revenue is because borrowing is very easy. We are borrowing based on GDP. 1 minute. Assuming somebody's father lives in Asokoro, which should be the basis of the borrowing? Is it the money that is going to earn as rent, or the value of the property? In Nigeria, we base the value of borrowing on our GDP, which is the property. It should be the revenue that is going to use to service it. So we need to change certain things and make our borrowing tied to revenue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am sure the rapporteurs are taking copious note of these interventions. So we'll take you last, Dr. Sagagi. Let's allot the last, we'll give you, I'll use my veto to extend the, sorry. So, sorry, let's take Alaji because he's closer here.
My name is...
He's closer here.
My name is Senator Abdullahi Bala Adamu. I represent Democracy Funders at the Senators Forum. My concern is the foundation on which we build the edifice we call Nigeria, that's the local governments. Governance at that level, and indeed the state levels, has virtually collapsed. When you have a collapsed political system or structure, how do you expect that structure to be very efficient in revenue generation and indeed the entire budgeting process? I'm sure some of you will share some of the experiences that some of us have had at the local governments. Revenue collection at the local chairman, it's a tool of political patronage. And when these revenues are collected, they are not actually channeled through the formal accounting processes. Market dues and all sorts of sources of revenue at the local government, when collected, they are just there, shared and dispersed till the next market or till the next exercise. At the state level, what you call governance is virtually a one-man affair. Governors have become one-man squad in the administration of their states. It's sad that even during the military in this country, we had better organization and structure of service delivery, revenue generation, budgeting. How many ministries do you see in our states that actually even get regular running costs? Simple request for 50,000 expenditure, you have to get the approval of the governor. So unless we are able to fix the civil service and the due process of execution of government activities and service delivery, a lot of revenues will not be realized because you don't have the institutions that will work and generate those revenues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So by the power conferred on me as the moderator, I just want to give a special slot to Dr. Sagagi briefly, then we'll come back to the panel.
Okay, so thank you, moderator, for that. I think mine is just a reminder. The gentleman who made the presentation coming from the federal government obviously focused on, the issues that affect the federal government. But I would like to remind us here that, the nature of the problem is such that you cannot avoid talking about the states and the local governments. We talk about revenue GDP ratio of 8%, 6 to 8% at the federal level. At the state level, it's even worse than that. I looked at the figures, I think for 2017, 2018, and the states, 36 states plus Abuja, just managed to collect about 1% of their nominal GDP, which is probably about 10 to 11% of their budget estimates for that year. But it's not only the size of the budget at the state level, but also this lopsidedness. The average revenue collected is about 22 billion, and only about 7 states are above average. Lagos alone collects about 35 to 40% of total IGR, but the 19 northern states collect only 50% of what Lagos is able to collect. Wow. 50% of what Lagos, 19 states versus just 1 state. And about 5 states, including Lagos and Rivers and Delta, collect about 65% of the entire IGR in the country. So it's not just the size, but also, be mindful of that when we discuss. Then the other thing is that it's not only the size of the revenue. That is a problem in the country. Of course, that is a big issue. But the uncertainty, the disruptive nature of the revenue that we collect, and its precarious nature. It is such that, you know, the economic trajectory in this country, our dependence on revenue from oil, which determines how much foreign exchange we get, it determines how much revenue we get, and also current account stability. Now that has generated a fiscal system that is very uncertain, that is very disruptive and very precarious. So when we discuss all this, let's not get fixated on that amount of 6% or 8% of GDP. I mean, if we get more, fine. But we also need to discuss how we can make this more stable, how we can make this, you know, certain and predictable. So those are the things that I thought I should remind our members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So please let's appreciate Dr. Sagagi. So we'll come back to the panel members, and I want to say that having distilled the presentation, we need to bear in mind that the entire chain of fiscal governance is being touched. Issues relating to planning is already being touched. Issues relating to budgeting is already being touched upon. Issues relating to procurement is also being implicated. And of course, auditing and issues about debt. So what we want to come back, what we want the panel members to help us reflect on now is to look at the big picture. Because this conversation is not just about revenue. It's about fiscal governance, not only at the federal level, but at the subnational level. So if you want to give us your thoughts, what do you think can be done? Let's move from problems and the challenges now to potential solutions. If you were to be in charge of managing, or you were hired to address this multiplicity of challenges in the fiscal governance ecosystem in Nigeria, what are those three things you would like to do? So this time around, I think, I'm sure Dr. Adigunja is eager to start. Am I correct? So we start with you, then we can have time to reflect, then we come to CITN.
Thank you, Prof, once more. And I will try to...
Please, if we can have one house so that we can track the conversation more effectively, it will be nice. If we want to discuss, we can just step aside a little bit outside at the lobby. Yes, sir.
Right, and I would endeavor to adhere strictly to the three things which you said. Now, if we have the opportunity, because the state is more closer to the man on the street, whilst the local government is the closest to the man on the street. And for me, the way that fiscal infrastructure is in Nigeria today, the corporate taxes are administered at the national level by the FIRS, and the state IRS are the ones that do administer taxes that relate to the people, which is the personal income, taxes, and the consumer taxes. In that regard, I do have the day-to-day experience regarding what goes on there. The first thing which I will strongly recommend is done is the autonomy of the state internal revenue services. Right? I mentioned earlier on, it is counterproductive to put an hungry man in the kitchen. Okay? Somebody who is on a salary of 80,000, who is on a salary of 100,000 naira, right? And you expect that person to generate billions for you. Okay? At the earliest opportunity of cutting corners, right? That will most likely happen. Secondly, uncoordinated use of data. We have, see, people will say that, oh, in Nigeria, we lack data, we lack data. No, we don't lack data. We have a lot of data in this country. When you want to know if we have, data is if the government wants to find out about something, then you'll be so amazed. But guess what? They are in silos. So what has to happen is that what you have, the laudable data collection at the national level is not being shared at the sub-national level. The local governments might not even have access to it at all. Use of data. So I know that the NIMSI, right, is the only authorized one to collect the ability about metrics in Nigeria, but how do other agencies plug into it? Even at the state level, it is so easy for somebody to come to us and say, hey, they want to pay income tax. They declare it. Yes, what do you have? I don't have money. I don't have this. I don't have that. They pay you 80,000 naira for the whole year. And then the guy will turn to the next building and go and register a car worth about 35 million naira. Right. So at that point, if we had data that are well coordinated, right, such issues should not happen. And then finally, it is the effective deployment and use of technology. If we fully deploy technology, and it doesn't have to be so expensive. Okay? What we are just looking at here. If we can deploy technology, it will help us a lot. I believe that the IGR generated at the sub-national level will jump automatically to 20-25%. I'll give you an example. Capital gains tax. Okay? It is it is practically non-existent here. You know why? It's because the so-called property details of land use, property use, register, blah blah blah. They are not well coordinated and shared. Right? So those would be the 3 areas for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think shall we have Professor Egu next? Then we'll come to Dr. Eze.
I think in addressing some of the key challenges in fiscal federalism, I would want to propose that you can address some of the challenges in the short term and some others in the long run or in the long term. I want to take up the first one that I think we need to deal with in the long run. Now, in the last few years, the nature of Nigeria's federal system has been thoroughly debated. And of course, many people have clamored for restructuring, although many of them do not even understand what restructuring is all about, But we do know that coming from a centralized federal system that has virtually taken control of both political and financial powers, we need to restructure in such a way that services that are closer to states should be removed from federal legislative lists. Now, a restructuring in that dimension is very important. People have talked about it, and some constitutional amendment processes have identified those things you need, to move from the exclusive legislative lists to concurrent. But we have not taken on board the question of also restructuring the taxing arrangement. Because if you are going to restructure responsibilities, move many of them to the states, you therefore also think of the corresponding financial powers for the states to deal with them. So my point really will be that a debate on political restructuring in this country cannot be complete unless you review the entire taxing arrangement. Okay. The second point, which I think you don't need to postpone, and I think
the short term now?
Yeah, in the short term,
yes,
are issues. The senator from Taraba spoke very well. And I think part of what he said provides the answer for the lady journalist who wanted to say, why is it that Nigerians do not pay tax? Because in many local places on market days, revenue collectors finish from what they are doing at the end of the day and they move into a beer parlor to spend the money. So the question is, why will people be encouraged to pay? So the issue of corruption is there, but the one I think we need to also address is the question of capacity, to administer tax. And I think higher levels of government need to strengthen capacity of subnational governments in the area of collection, but more importantly, in matters related to budgeting and public expenditure control. And I think this is something we need to do at local level so that you can change the perception of people about governments at local level and probably, incentivize people to pay. But most importantly, the real issue for us is to connect taxation to governance. And here I go back to Peter Ake's famous theory of the two publics. When in the village setting, we don't touch money belonging to our village association, precisely because it comes from us. But the one that is under the control of the PAMSEC, he brings to the village and is celebrated, precisely because of the very character of the state itself. The state has behaved like an alien force in the way its operators and functionaries relate to citizens and the management of public funds. So the real value in the discourse on taxation is to establish that connection between taxation and governance. In fact, when I read Jane Guyer's famous book on representation without taxation, it is very clear. And I think we need to revisit the populism of the post-independence rulers who pretended they didn't want to do what colonial rule did, by taxing people. And as you know, in many post-colonial, in fact, issue of taxation was removed. From that kind of populism created, entrenched a system in which we disconnected governance and taxation. We need to return to this.
Thank you very much, sir. So I think by way of, please let's appreciate Professor Egu. By way of logical sequencing, naturally we come to Chartered Institute of Taxation, because taxation has been coming up. And I want you to focus on these areas. As someone who has been drinking taxation, eating taxation, and breathing taxation everywhere. One, how do we deal with the issue of data fragmentation in such a way that we can see through all the data that is being given about tax to GDP ratio, as pointed out by Dr. Sagagi, is probably looking at maybe the federal level, and we don't even know how reliable that data is, as you also alluded to. Second point, tax culture. How do we connect tax to governance? How do we connect tax to representation in such a way that I can feel happy when I want to pay my tax? I was in South Africa last month, just to get a sense of what we are. And somebody was addressing us that some Japanese delegates came to South Africa on a study tour. And when they were briefing them, they were briefing the Japanese people that South Africans do not pay their dues, they do not pay their bills, and they don't like paying their taxes. And Japanese people started looking at each other what does that mean? That somebody will not pay tax or will not pay his bills? Does it really happen? They couldn't believe that somebody will not willingly go and pay tax, because if you don't do that in Japan, you won't even do it. How do we get to a situation where we have a culture that people, so two things, issues of data fragmentation and how do we harmonize across federal, state and local government? Then how do we boost tax culture in Nigeria?
Thank you, moderator. Permit me to lay a foundation before addressing this too. In 1953, there was the we had the federal constitution in 1954 in order to determine the nature of revenue mobilization and the fiscal allocation. We had this Lord Chick Commission of 1953 who came out with a position, a recommendation that was accepted for the purpose of the 1954 Federal Constitution, that states should collect personal income tax and the federal corporate taxes. That was what bettered the Finance Law number 4 of Eastern Region of 1956, the Income Tax Law of Western Region of 1957, and the Personal Tax Law of Northern Nigeria of 1962. So, but in the course of operation, we had the Reisman Commission of 1957. What was an issue? Because we'll be addressing the symptoms. Let's know how the foundation, because this building, except you know the nature of the foundation, it might just collapse on you. So when the foundation is destroyed, what shall the righteous do? We must look at where the rain started to beat us. The Reisman Commission, why it was brought up was because whereas the Western region was collecting personal income tax based on source and residence, the Eastern region, which was the first region that introduced the payee that became operational in UK in 1944, Eastern region was collecting based on residence only. The meaning is that if you are from Eastern region and you come to Ibadan to make purchases, the taxman will arrest you. If you say, I just came on a visit to make purchases, he will say you must pay your personal income tax because you've come to make purchases in the Western region. Whether you are resident there or not, but if you are from the West and you go to the East to make purchases at Onitsha, and you are arrested to pay your personal income tax, if you say, I just came on a visit, I will be returning tomorrow, they will leave you. So because of the intricacies involved, the then federal government said, raised the Reisman Commission of 1957. In 1958, they made their recommendations. Those recommendations were substantially accepted and formed the basis of Section 70 of the 1960 Constitution. What does it provide? It gave the regions the power to impose and collect. The current Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria in 1999 has given the states the power to collect and no power to impose. It may look simple, but it is at the basis why the states are weak. KC Weir said that financial subordination in a federalism, no matter the legal format you have, will kill the sense of federalism. That is to say, if we should go by KC Weir's proposition, we are not practicing federalism in Nigeria. So the personal income tax we had as at independence, the states had power to impose. So when you see a law, the section 1 will be social tax is hereby imposed by the region. As we speak today, personal income tax is imposed by virtue of item D7, part 2, schedule 2 to the Constitution, which empowers the National Assembly to impose the tax, the states to just go and collect. So because they don't have power to impose, so they are the mercy, they are errand boys to the National Assembly. And that is why In fact, item 9 provides for the State House of Assembly to make laws for local government to collect. Today we have exclusive legislative list, 68 items for the Federation, none for states. There is no state exclusive legislative list. So what the states are doing is that any function that has been ascribed to them out of the 30 in the concurrent list, they impose that is outside the one the federal government is interested in. They impose tax on it. And that has led to multiplicity of taxes. And these are foundational issues that's why I say background. We must get constitutional and legislative amendment. CITM presented a paper at the last Senate hearing and requested that this problem be tackled from its root, because all the observations we are making here, they are symptoms of this root. And once you don't get the law right, because taxation cannot be without law, if you don't get it right, all the discussions on top of it, whatever you build on top of it will collapse.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I think what we need to do is those specific sections of the Constitution that you feel require amendment, during the breakout session, we can point them out so that they will be taken note of. And this will be part of the things to take away from this discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Eze. Right. I think we come to Dr. Lawal, then we come to Dr. Faswa. We take Ifani to wrap up the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Professor Fatai. So a lot of things still stand out, and from a lot that has been said from the panel, I quite agree with Professor Sam around some of the issues of complexities in terms of the number of, because to be honest, Nigeria is the country with about 39 authorities that are empowered to collect taxes. Yes, we have the most complex revenue collection system in the world. We have multiplicity of tax laws beyond what we could imagine, because look at the constitutional powers to impose and collect taxes, then look at the federal laws that establish taxes, right? Then you go to the states, you get the state tax laws, and then you get bylaws at the local governments in many of the states. Well, with some of the projects like SIFTAs and so on, we are seeing states gradually moving towards that point where they are codifying and consolidating or harmonizing tax laws to give the state tax authority the power to administer and collect on behalf of the local governments and remit same to them eventually. But still, it doesn't solve the problem. We are still a very complex system when it comes to tax. The customs is a revenue collecting agency. The 36 states have 36 authorities. FCTRS is another, the FIRS is another. So, and then what you find in tax practices, right? Even though the National Assembly makes the law or imposes at the center, the states have the power to draw up the laws that administer in the state. So you have variation in tax practices in the various states of the Federation. It's one of the biggest problems that we have in tax administration, and I'm quite happy with what he talked about now. Going back to the Constitution, are we addressing the problems as they are in the Constitution, or we are making cosmetic plastic surgeries to the problem by putting out, finance acts every 1 or 2 years afterwards? Are we going to go back to address it as it is in the Constitution? Okay. So it brings forward two questions that are quite simple, and we can answer these questions without much trouble. Question of first, sincerity of purpose on the side of those that are tasked with these responsibilities, and then the political will to drive that purpose to the end goal in terms of how we change our revenue administration system. Now, let's cast our minds back to a lot of the things that we see. Questions around, taxpayer education, tax culture, tax moral has been raised here. Now, how do you address that? Now, think about it. in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, down to the 70s, what built Nigeria? Was it oil? It was tax. Obviously, we are Nigerians paying taxes. The question she raised, yes, we were paying taxes. Do we have the right tax morale? Yes, we did. What changed all of that? Of course, the oil cost or the resource cost that came from oil has a part to it, right? But something else happened. And this is fundamental. At least that I know in northern Nigeria. The disengagement of the traditional institutions from the tax system. Because in the north, at least, before the colonial era and even post-colonial era, the traditional institutions were deep-rooted in the tax system. Right? But now you take out the Meanguas, the Takachis, you know, the district head, the village heads from the tax system. And these are the people that have direct connection to the people at the grassroots that you are supposed to tax. But they are not connected to the tax system. And now you bring in an authority of the state and you superimpose over, you know, what should be ordinarily the tax potential or the tax net. Now you have a challenge because the tax authority is disconnected from the people.
Local context.
Yes.
Okay.
So you ask your question and go to the various states in the federation, with the exclusion of Lagos perhaps, you will find that hardly will you have a state that has over 500,000 in their tax net. Hardly. Okay. You would have. Now, if you go by the JTB PIN registration, you will be shocked at the numbers, right? Lagos has over 1 million. With the population of Lagos, barely 2 million in the tax net in Lagos. Now, how do we bring back everybody into the tax net?
Okay.
How do we make sure that these taxes are equitable and economical for us to collect?
Okay. Thank you
as
very much.
a nation? These are some of the questions.
Okay.
And now, if you come to addressing this, you have to look at the numbers. The numbers matter a lot, because no matter what you do, if you don't have the right number in your tax net.
You're talking of data.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You will not be able to collect as much to satisfy the requirements of the state.
Okay.
Right? You will not be able to. So
thank you very much. I think we'll pause there so that we can have Dr. Tokwe Kaswa. Please, let's appreciate Dr. Lawal. So you've listened attentively to these conversations around tax morale, tax culture, tax administration, and the fiscal governance ecosystem in general. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lawal made some very valid points, and equally all the gentlemen who spoke earlier in this session. I also have a question to attend to from the journalist at the back about why Nigerians don't want to pay taxes and the resistance. Okay, so the truth is that you know, Ghanaians too, they are suffering like Nigerians. Okay, perhaps even more, but they are having to step up. I think there are some fundamental reforms that have gone on in many countries around the world which Nigeria is not cottoning on to. Even in Saudi Arabia and UAE, they introduced VAT. These were tax-free jurisdictions. And some would say, well, it's against the religion, but Saudi Arabia and the UAE started in 2018, Saudi started in 2019. They don't joke with it, 5% VAT, which may go up. So even in spite of the poverty and the fact that we are all suffering from colonial hangovers, Ghana reformed, Kenya reformed, many countries in Africa have reformed, Egypt reformed. What occurred to me being in Ghana for about 2 weeks was, these guys they must be pulling some tremendous amount of money, consistent amount of money through this. They introduced 1% COVID fee. Introduce that in Nigeria, we'll probably have a riot bigger than NSAS. COVID fee, and everybody has to pay. If you go to some kind of places like hotels or restaurants or stuff, you have to pay.
In the airport.
Even in the airport, you have to pay. So listen, I think there's impunity there. However, and of course, madam, you were right, because what I also didn't have time to say then was that in my almost 2 weeks in Ghana, I only heard siren twice, and they were ambulances. Yesterday, I was driving down from the airport here, and the governor, maybe, I think for Enugu, one of them, chased everybody out of the road, just driving down from airport in the 10 SUV convoy and 4 ILOCs, whatever it is they call it. And the value of those cars could be as much as 3 billion. Forget the local people, the local government people who use the money to eat, to go to beer parlor. I didn't see that in Ghana. So impunity has crept in. Whatever got into us in this country, whether the followers and the leaders, and I mentioned political capture. The reason why Mr. Adeyemi, Dr. Adeyemi and his department is having that problem is because people just don't care anymore. Everybody maxes out in this country. Of course, the people will step up and say, no, this is all what we want. We can't just pay tax because you guys are eating our money anyhow. But the politicians too, everybody takes maximum everything they can take. It was when COVID hit, and I saw in Arise TV, Charles Anagolu was interviewing the Minister of Finance, say, Madam, now we know we're all in trouble. COVID had hit, companies were closed, everybody was closed down. But you guys did not even purchase local when we had the time. And she said, yes, they regret that they did not purchase local. What has changed? Nothing, not a lot has changed. Even at the state level, I dare say, the local governments probably don't exist. And again, so I must also mention the issue of when, and of course, sorry, before I go to that, and I'll soon be done, sir, I won't take much of your time like my friend here, So, I was in Dawano Market and Gezawa in Kano for about 2 weeks. In Dawano Market, the biggest grain market in Africa, about 5 billion to 8 billion goes on in that market every day. What the governors, that maybe they are afraid, maybe they think it's not cultural to go to them and say, what can we, okay, don't call it tax, don't call it tax. What the state is entitled to, when I say state, whether federal, state, or local government, is not only taxation, you're entitled to duties, to fines, to fees, to levies, to what? To charges, to rent, to rates. 5 billion takes place in Dawano. If you were there, I called it a very good name and talk to them, talk to the associations and say, guys, what can, maybe small charges. And one of the things about taxes, which you mentioned earlier, whether it's economical, whether it's payable, whether it's economical to administer. I may not want to subscribe, sorry, Prof, I'll soon be done in 1 minute, sir. I may not want to subscribe to the idea that, okay, the local guys should go back, except the local guys, the traditional rulers, can plug in into I said they can plug in into TSA. But if we say they should collect the taxes, then of course it will be a case of they collect the taxes and they use it on their own. I'm afraid that the transition from that system, as enumerated by Dr. Eze, all of those things that happened in the past. Look, nobody wants to pay taxes anywhere. Let's not deceive ourselves. We had Aba women riot, we had the Kodepene women riot, and even abroad, even today, even in England, people resist taxes.
In the US too. Even in the US, everywhere in the world. However, one of it is the fidelity that the people who run government can show. Show fidelity that in Lagos, under Fashola in Lagos, and even under Tinubu, partly under Tinubu into Fashola, they will install signboards on the road to say your tax is working. And that was when we saw boom in the tax collection in Lagos. And I think that this is something that could be adopted by other states if they were prepared to be honest. And even at the federal level, let people know that their taxes are working and they will pay. But let me say that, if we say the government, they are not using our money well, and of course they are not using our money well, and then we will say we're not even going to pay again. We're building hell on earth. And this is what translates into banditry, terrorism, kidnapping, all of that. All the armed robbers in Nigeria are now kidnappers, I must inform you. It's not done by one tribe. All the armed robbers, there are no armed robberies. This doesn't happen that often again. Before, the crime we had was people go and bully you in your house. Now they kidnap people and they take 100 million, 200 million, God knows how much. So we need to reform this. We need to help ourselves. Lastly, Prof,
Someone mentioned that the taxes are too ambitious or that our budgets are too, I'm sorry. In contesting for president in 2019, I did quite a bit of research, which I put out there. I know nobody here voted for me, but it's all good. I voted for myself.
Are you sure?
So I voted for myself. Sorry, Prof. I'm very sure. You know, but you see, and there's a reason I went for that. You can see that some of the issues we're talking about here are macro issues. Macro issues that you have to deal with from the top. The gentleman from NIAS is, you know, look at the points he made about the Auditor General, and my one here, Mr. Ademi, Mr. Ismail is here, from Auditor General. These are issues that must be dealt with right from the top. But I did an analysis then. Nigeria has the lowest per capita budget in the world, second to only the Democratic Republic of Congo. Our budget is nothing. Go and check the budget of Angola. Go and check the budget of Kenya. Go and check the budget of Algeria, Egypt. We are punching below our weight in this country. And look, we must not fall into this mediocrity. Mediocrity is now defining us in this country. The money is too much. Which money is too much? Look, I ran around this country. You see the situation of schools in this country, whether in the north or south, all of them blown away as if, you know, it was a war zone. So I say that, look, we haven't even started. You kept pushing for 15 trillion. Luckily, well, I write a lot, so maybe sometimes the government is now up to 16 trillion. That number must keep going up. And they needn't to be financed by deficit. This is, in this regime, we have seen that the reliance on so much deficit. And I always look at deficit in terms of the budget itself. We're talking of 30, 35, 40% deficit on the budget itself. 7 trillion, almost 7 trillion, the budget deficit out of 16. That's too much. The consideration for and when countries run deficit, you think about balancing the budget after 2 or 3 or 4 years. We've been running deficit back to back to back to back, 40% deficit, you know, on the budget. We're not talking about GDP. When you bring in the GDP numbers, sir, when you bring in the GDP numbers, it's meant to confuse people.
Okay.
Just look at the deficit vis-a-vis the budget. It's just like a household. Okay, if the father says that, look, I'm earning 100,000 naira in a year, but I want to keep spending 150,000 every year, you are irresponsible. So there's a need to do that. But I think that, look, all of us in advocacy, what Pearl is doing here, what people are going to do in academia, this country is ours to save. We needn't be in government before we say the right thing, before we do the right thing, before we guide them. We should also know there's a certain capture that goes on. When people go into politics and get into office, something happens, which I've not been able to place my finger on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we will take Ifeanyi as the last speaker on the panel, then we'll wrap up the panel discussion.
Thank you very much. I think it's a tough act to follow when this erudite gentleman must have analyzed practically all the issues and offered some solutions. But there are fundamental issues we need to deal with. Those fundamentals, of course, emerging from all of the conversation is around constitutionalism and our fiscal federalism. That needs to be reformed, and is a matter that is very, very urgent. That we have to deal with. Should we continue to pretend like the proverbial ostrich that has its head, hides in danger, but the entire chunk of the body is outside? Very, very fundamental that we need to deal with. So unpacking all the constitutional issues around fiscal governance and fiscal federalism needs to be dealt with, and I think that we need to deal with in the breakout sessions. Number two, I highlighted something around, because I won't go back into the tax structure and all the systems. I'm a system person. That's what I've been doing all my life. And so I need to come back to a fundamental issue that we need to deal with. Those fundamental issues that we need to deal with is the factor of production. Do we really have an economy that could actually grow our tax base in all the states? Do states actually see themselves as an economy? States have to see themselves as an economy. What is the contribution of the real sector in some states in Nigeria? And as we know, there are quite few states who could actually boast of that. Governors only think about what? Money, they get allocation. If you engage with governors, which we do all the time, it's about allocation, a change in revenue allocation formula, and all of those things that you hear. Why don't you think about the factor of production that will grow your state's economy and grow your ability to do what? Collect more revenues.
I think that's a fundamental thing, because right now, federally, what do? We sell crude oil and import refined product. That is hemorrhaging our resources. Very, very important that we also take a look at that and make sure that we produce, actually refine our own petroleum products and enhance the factor of production and grow our GDP. Our agricultural produce, we say agriculture is the basis of our economy and all of that. There seems to be too repetitive over time that we are telling ourselves a lie. What are the value added in our agricultural value chain? Why is the federal government still holding back on autonomous government agencies that needed to be privatized? And of course, save us a lot of revenue. We need to do that. If not, citizens must also continue to demand for services, but must be encouraged to pay their taxes and do what? Demand for services. I think it's a major factor, because if there is a pressure by citizens, what do you do with our money? We do not challenge service failures. That's a big problem. So citizens must do what? Challenge service failures within the system of government. We simply grumble, go to social media, post them, and then we relax. But we must challenge service failures, because if we commit to paying taxes, we pay taxes and then we challenge service failures. Legislative oversight is something I also like to emphasize. I think it's very weak, but we can strengthen that, right? The legislators must also know that they represent the people. I found it very funny yesterday when protesters were stopped from accessing the National Assembly. If you stop protesters from accessing the National Assembly, where else can they go to aid their views? Are they no longer representatives of the people? So legislative oversight must also be what strengthened. And I think one of the things the National Assembly will help us do immediately is also the audit bill. I think a lot of stakeholders here have worked on it, but last year it was not signed into law. Where is it today? Is it likely going to be passed by the 9th Assembly? Let it happen. That strengthens audit system that our colleague from the National Assembly had talked about. I think I will stop at that.
Thank you very much, Ifeanyi. Well, if we had made fiscal governance alone the subject of conversation for the entire day, I am sure we are not likely to exhaust the issues that are involved in it. It's a very complex and broad area. So, nevertheless, I'm sure from the keynote and the very valuable contributions made by panel members, they've been able to touch each and every part of the fiscal governance ecosystem. We have made slight adjustment to the program. We are not likely to proceed on the breakout session now. We defer it to the end of the second panel discussion, then we'll take the breakout session at once. And on this note, because we've already exceeded our time, I want to thank the panel members for their very insightful contributions, very compelling contributions, and very useful observations that they have made. Please let's appreciate them. And we'll also appreciate the audience, one, for your rapt attention throughout the discussion and the contributions you also made to the discussion. They have enriched. I'm sure we are all better informed about not just the issues that are at stake with respect to fiscal governance in Nigeria, but potential innovative solutions that can be used to address them. Let's hope that at the end of the day, we'll be able to tie down these points and attach it to specific areas, and then citizens can take it forward from there. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope it has been a very useful discussion so far. Thank you very much. Now we go for tea break. We have earned our tea. So after tea break, how many minutes do we have for tea break?
30 minutes. Tea is just outside.
Can't we use 20 minutes? 20 minutes should be okay.
Let's try.
Let's use 20 minutes.
We'll aim for 20 and see how we do.
Yes, let's use 20 minutes so that we are back here in 20 minutes time.
Thank you so much. So please, let's go outside and take tea.
Yes.
And we'll come back.